Behind the facade of innocence, darkness lurks, a world where truth is twisted and loyalty is demanded. They prey on the vulnerable, manipulate the minds, and commit unspeakable acts. Throughout history, cults have cast long shadows. They promise salvation, but deliver damnation. Welcome to the world of cultish crimes. To protect the privacy of the individuals involved, the names of the victims and their families have been altered. Pseudonyms used in the book The Devil on the Doorstep have been employed to keep certain people anonymous. Colin Batley was born in 1963 and grew up in East London. His family struggled financially and he grew up in a challenging environment. Unfortunately, he was subjected to physical and sexual mistreatment by his father from a very young age, and this traumatic experience may have contributed to him doing the same thing to another child who was younger than him in his neighborhood. When he was 19, he met 18-year-old Elaine. They quickly fell in love and soon discovered that Elaine was pregnant. The news of the impending child prompted them to get married. They went on to have a family of 3 with 2 sons and 1 daughter. Colin worked various jobs to support his family. At one point, he was a security guard, and reportedly, he even got into prostitution at a time. He was also a street vendor. Additionally, he had a side business breeding Rottweilers and later expanded to include Siamese cats. Colin had an unusual appearance. He was tall and slender with long black hair and a striking feature, a single large front tooth. His missing teeth gave him a somewhat intimidating look. It was in the 1980s when Colin became fascinated with the work of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley was an occultist and magician. He wrote the Book of the Law in Cairo, Egypt in 1904. The Book of the Law is considered the cornerstone of Thelemic practice, influencing subsequent Thelemic texts and rituals. Aleister said that the book was dictated to him by a beyond human being Awaz, who he later referred to as his own holy guardian angel. The book contains 3 chapters, each of which Crowley said had been dictated and written down in 1 hour. The 3 chapters of the book are attributed to the deities Nuit, Hadit, and Rahu Kuwait. The book delves into the concept of individual will and encourages readers to break free from societal norms. One of its most famous quotes is, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law," which emphasizes personal freedom, especially in matters of sexuality. Aleister Crowley drew inspiration from various belief systems, including ancient Egyptian mythology. Colin treated the Book of the Law as a sacred text, reading it daily. However, his interpretation of the book's teachings, especially regarding sexuality and relationships, would lead to significant problems. He used the book to justify his actions, regardless of societal norms or ethical considerations. He also became obsessed with the occult and Satanism and nitpicked beliefs from each to accommodate the lifestyle that he desired to live. Colin began sharing his newfound beliefs with Elaine, who was surprisingly receptive to his ideas. Together, they introduced these concepts to their friends and family, forming a group dedicated to studying and applying the principles of the Book of the Law. Over time, Colin emerged as a leader within the group, interpreting the book's teachings and guiding its members. As Colin's influence grew, he started seeing himself as a powerful figure. He proclaimed himself the Prince Priest, claiming direct communication with divine entities that he referred to as the gods. These beings, he asserted, provided him with prophetic knowledge and guidance. By leveraging this perceived authority, Colin sought to control his followers, making them believe that he was omniscient and that they could never deceive him. And his followers truly believed that it was impossible to hide anything from Colin because he had direct communication with the gods.
I think that Colin had a certain aura to make people believe that there was more to it, that he really did have access to a higher realm, a secret to, eternal life.
The exact number of followers at this point is unclear, but we do know that Colin's influence had grown significantly. His followers were now deeply devoted to his teachings and considered themselves part of a larger global organization known as the Church.
Batley was able to maintain that his cult was part of a far larger church that even had headquarters in France, that there's some very powerful people involved who could cause harm if they wished, and that it would be better for them if they did what he said.
Colin had successfully established himself as the leader of this cult, shaping the beliefs and the behavior of its members. He soon introduced ritualistic practices into the cult. These rituals involved the cult members wearing robes with nothing underneath and chanting and reading from the Book of the Law. As the rituals progressed, Colin would demand that all members engage in sexual activity with one another. These practices became increasingly frequent, involving both married and unmarried members. Orgies and group sexual encounters were normalized, often occurring in front of spouses. Colin justified these actions by misinterpreting the teachings of the Book of the Law, convincing his followers that they were fulfilling a divine purpose. He indoctrinated them to believe in a morality-free world where they could indulge in any desire without consequence. He said that there was no such thing as sin, and that they could create their own will and should be able to do exactly what they wanted to. To maintain control, Colin employed various tactics. He forbade everyone from making direct eye contact with him, claiming it would lead to a dangerous spiritual encounter. He said if they looked into his eyes, they would look directly into the abyss. He had strict rules regarding the veneration of Egyptian deities, demanding that followers never turn their backs on their images. Daily nude meditation and unwavering obedience to Colin's demands were also enforced. To instill fear and maintain order, Colin used his vicious Rottweilers to intimidate and threaten those who questioned his authority. As a final symbol of allegiance, he forced members to get a tattoo of the Eye of Horus, promising divine protection.
All female members of the sect had a tattoo known as the Eye of Horus, which is known as the all-seeing eye. It's supposed to be a protective mechanism. It means that it can see everything, and Batley can see them, and in so doing he can control them and protect them.
Tragically, many of Colin's followers, including himself and Elaine, had children. Using the same twisted interpretation of the Book of the Law, Colin convinced his followers that their children should also participate in the cult's sexual activities. He indoctrinated them into believing that this was what the gods wanted and that it was a necessary part of their spiritual development. The concept of traditional family structures were completely dismantled within the cult. The notion of parents, siblings, and extended family was replaced by a singular focus on the cult and its supposed divine purpose. He convinced his followers that their loyalty to the cult superseded any familial bonds. And unfortunately, he was successful in persuading the parents to involve their children in the cult's disturbing rituals.
Drawing on the writings of Aleister Crowley, Colin was able to make people question the boundaries around behaviour within the family and sexual propriety, and having those barriers taken down and stripped away, he took away all semblance of what we would consider to be normality.
Each child had to be initiated into the cult, and this involved Colin forcing himself onto them sexually. This happened to the boys and the girls, although the boys were often forced to have sexual intercourse with Colin's wife, Elaine. The children were forced to participate in these horrific acts, often forced to witness their parents do it with each other, other members, and other children. Colin justified this by claiming that it was a test of loyalty and devotion to the church. He told the children that their participation was essential to their spiritual growth and acceptance within the church. He would often pair younger girls with older male members of the cult, declaring them husband and wife in a sham ceremony. This was a manipulative tactic to protect the cult's members from legal repercussions. If a young girl became pregnant as a result of the SA, Colin could easily point to the designated husband as the father, shielding himself and the cult from external scrutiny. Colin used his position of power to exploit his followers for his own sick gratification. He would assign degrading sexual acts to individual members, labeling them as tests to determine their worthiness within the cult. These tests were designed to humiliate and control the victims, and then just reinforced Colin's dominance. He instilled fear in his followers by threatening divine retribution if they ever revealed the nature of these tests to anyone. They were not even allowed to speak to each other about the tests, not even within the cult. and this ensured their silence and maintained his control over them. This also allowed him to conceal things from Elaine, and while she was aware of some of the sexual activity that was going on within the cult, she was kept in the dark about others. The sexual activity Elaine was aware of that Colin was involved with, he justified to her by claiming divine authority, manipulating her into accepting his behavior as the will of the gods. Elaine just had one rule. She told Colin that he had to make her aware every time the gods demanded him to have sex with someone else. They were not allowed to have sex with anyone without the other knowing about it. Then Colin promoted a very disturbing role within the cult to the woman to aspire to, the Scarlet Woman. To attain this title, women were expected to engage in promiscuous sexual activity, ultimately aiming to have sexual encounters with over 1,854 men.
The chosen priest is the prince priest, the beast, and in his woman, called the Scarlet Woman, is all power given.
Colin then further exploited his followers by demanding a significant portion of their monthly income. He convinced them that these funds were being used for the benefit of the church, but in reality, he was using the money for his own personal gain. Despite the financial hardship this caused, Colin only provided each member with a meager allowance of £50 every fortnight, forcing them to live in poverty. Katrina lived with her mom and her stepdad, Vincent Barden, and she endured a traumatic childhood. From a young age, she was subjected to SA by her stepdad, Vincent. Unfortunately, she felt unable to confide in her mom about all of this, and when she entered her teenage years, she started to rebel against her circumstances. In the 1980s, Katrina's mom decided that it would be best for her to go and live with her aunt Elaine Batley, who of course was married to Colin Batley. Little did she know that she was literally sending Katrina into the worst environment that she possibly could. Katrina was moved from a bad situation into an actual living nightmare. Initially, Colin and Elaine showered Katrina with affection and gifts, making her feel loved and welcome. For a time, she experienced a sense of happiness and belonging within their home. However, this facade of love and acceptance soon crumbled. Approximately 2 months after Katrina had moved in, Colin took her aside and asked her to join the church. At this time, he didn't reveal any details of what went on in the ritualistic ceremonies. However, he did make it clear that her continued stay in the home was contingent on her loyalty and obedience to his teachings. Faced with the terrifying thought of returning to her stepfather, Katrina reluctantly agreed to join the cult and to follow Colin. A week later, Katrina was told that it was time for her initiation. Her initiation was Colin brutally SAing her. She was only 15 years old. She had just escaped the clutches of her stepfather, who had been SAing her for years. And now she was being subjected to the worst type of SA, and that at the hands of her own uncle. After Katrina's initiation, she would experience the same treatment from the other members of the cult, including Colin's wife, Elaine. Elaine would sometimes watch Colin SA Katrina and even join in. Along with other cult members SAing Katrina, Colin also invited strangers into his home to SA her, and would watch as they did it, and often joined in along with Elaine. Katrina would sometimes beg Colin to put a stop to it, but he would threaten her life. So now, on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, Katrina was forced to have sex with her family, the cult members, and even strangers. Colin presented Katrina with a necklace and told her to never ever take it off. The necklace bore an upside-down cross, which Colin claimed was a symbol of her allegiance to the church. He told her that if it broke, she would instantly lose her life. To further isolate her, he restricted her freedom, forbidding her from leaving the house or contacting loved ones without his explicit permission. Just after a year later, when Katrina was 16 years old, Colin went to her and instructed her to go and have sex with a male member of the cult named Matthew. He then declared them husband and wife. It is believed that Colin did this because he feared Katrina would fall pregnant, and if she did, it would be easy to say that Matthew was the father. Jackie Marling lived in East End London with her boyfriend Alan. They had 2 daughters, Annabelle and Olivia. Annabelle was Jackie's daughter from a previous relationship, but Alan loved her as his own. Olivia was Alan's biological daughter, and Annabelle's biological father, David, was still involved in her life, and she would go and spend every other weekend with him. Jackie was very cold and very distant when it came to her children. She never showed them any love or any affection, and she always made sure that they had food and a roof over their heads, but she never really even spoke to them. Alan, on the other hand, was a loving parent, and he showered them with love and affection, and I think he did this because he wanted to make up for what they were not getting from their mom. Jackie also had extended family, sisters, and a mother and father who loved her children and showed them love and affection and would hug them and kiss them.
She did have an extended family. However, the one person that really she craved love, attention and affection from was actually her mother, Jackie. And this was singularly missing. With children who are deprived of that, there's a vulnerability that makes them very susceptible to being groomed in the presence of any affection or attention that they might be given.
Jackie was unemployed and she was on benefits. In her 20s, she met Colin Batley and was quickly drawn to his teachings. Within no time, she became a devoted member of the church. Despite her efforts to involve her boyfriend Alan, he remained uninterested in the cult's beliefs. Unaware of the cult's dark secrets, Alan was oblivious to the disturbing rituals and sexual activities taking place within the group. Jackie developed an obsessive devotion to Colin, hanging on his every word and eagerly embracing all of his teachings. Their relationship soon evolved into an intense affair, unbeknownst to Elaine, Colin's wife, and Alan, Jackie's boyfriend. Annabelle noticed that her mom would go upstairs to her room every day, and one day by accident she walked in on her mom meditating naked in front of a type of shrine she had created for the gods she was worshipping. This upset Annabelle, but she didn't really know what was going on. She had heard her mom speak of Colin before, but she had no idea about the new belief system that her mom had adopted, because her mom really just never spoke to her. In 1997, Colin had a dedicated following of 17 members. These individuals were so devoted to him that when he announced his family's move to Wales, they willingly uprooted their lives and followed him. This included Jackie, Alan, Annabelle, and Olivia. The entire cult relocated to the small seaside town of Kidwelly in Wales. They settled in a cul-de-sac with each member acquiring a nearby house. Jackie, Alan, Annabelle, and Olivia moved into a house adjacent to Colin and Elaine's.
In that area, there's something like 900 square miles of basically nothing. And people can vanish if they choose to do so. There are all sorts of alternative lifestyles underway down there. Tucked away, no one can see them, no one knows what's happening.
Living in close proximity, the cult members formed a tight-knit community, but it was more like a dysfunctional family. To maintain secrecy, Colin actually told the members that if anyone from outside of the cult asked anything about the community or group, then they had to say that they were Mormons. Although Jackie was a loyal follower of Colin's, Annabelle had never met him until the move to Wales. One night, in the dead of night, Jackie went and woke up then 7-year-old Annabelle and told her to come downstairs. In the dimly lit living room, Annabelle found herself face to face with Colin. The eerie setting and unexpected encounter understandably frightened her. And I don't blame her, because can you imagine seeing this in the middle of your living room in the middle of the night? Colin immediately informed Annabelle that her life was about to change. He told her that she was special and that she had a special purpose within the church, and that purpose was to become the Scarlet Woman of the church. And if you missed it when I explained it earlier, in order to become the Scarlet Woman, the woman actually had to sleep with 1,854 different men. But Annabelle had no clue what this meant. She just met Colin and he was telling her things that just made no sense to her. He didn't explain what the Scarlet Woman was. He didn't explain anything about the church. So she just felt completely clueless and scared. It all just felt like a really bad dream. But her bad dream was about to become an absolute nightmare. Because at that moment, Jackie walked towards Colin. She got onto her knees and she performed oral sex on him in front of Annabelle.
The evening in which Annabelle meets Colin Batley for the first time, he demonstrates the power and the control he has over her mother. This will have been engraved on Annabelle's mind, the power he had over all the church members, including her.
As this went on, Colin just continued to preach to Annabelle, and he was telling her how important it was for her to follow the rules that he would give her, and that there was no such thing as family.
By telling Annabelle there's no such thing as family, actually it's telling her there is no one out there to protect you. It's possible to take a child and make them believe the most outrageous things are normal.
Little Annabelle felt like something was terribly wrong. She didn't even know what she was looking at, of course, but she knew in her heart that something was off. She was only 7 years old when this happened. After Jackie and Colin finished, they told Annabelle she could go back to bed. And as she turned to walk away, Colin said to her, "When you have your periods, I will have you." Even this confused Annabelle. I mean, what was a period? What did he mean by he would have her? She had no idea, but sadly, she would find out. For a while after meeting Colin, Annabelle was filled with anxiety. She was really scared. But after a while, she started to settle into her new life in Wales, and she was enrolled in a public school, and she started to make new friends. She was sad that her dad, David, was all the way back in London and she couldn't see him, but she was really trying to just make the best of her new life. What made matters worse for her was that when her dad phoned, her mom would not allow him to speak to her. Jackie was isolating Annabelle under Colin's instructions, but it had been a while since the incident took place in the living room with Annabelle, her mom, and Colin, so she just tried to push it out of her mind and to just forget about it and continue on with her life. Soon after moving to Wales, Jackie and Elaine's relationship started to deteriorate. Elaine was working away from home a lot of the time, but this suited Jackie just fine because she didn't want him around anyway. Jackie became visibly annoyed when Elaine just entered a room. They had frequent arguments that strained their bond, and ultimately they decided to separate. While the exact reasons for the breakup remain unclear, it's possible that Elaine became aware of the affair between Jackie and Colin. Following the separation, Elaine moved out of the house and he moved to a nearby town, but now 2-year-old Olivia and 7-year-old Annabelle had to live alone with their mom, Jackie. The family still resided in the house next door to Colin, adding another layer of complexity to the already tumultuous situation. Annabelle and Colin's daughter Hope quickly became close friends. Living next door and being of similar ages, they naturally gravitated towards each other. This friendship was a source of comfort for Annabelle, who had left all of her friends behind in London. The cult members would sometimes organize seemingly normal social gatherings such as children's parties, group trips, and barbecues, and these formed some special memories for the children at least, but unfortunately that was overshadowed by the cult's darker influences. One day in 2001, Annabelle was playing with Hope outside, and it was a hot day. The heat started making Annabelle feel lightheaded and sick, and she told Hope that she just needed to go home and rest for a little while. She went into her house and went to lay on her bed, but as she lay down on her bed, Colin entered her room. She could smell him. He smelled like sweat and tobacco. Colin then climbed on top of Annabelle. He pinned her down and he brutally SA'd her. When he was done, he turned to her and said, "I told you I'd have you." Annabelle was distraught. This completely caught her off guard and she didn't know what to do. She actually felt like she did something wrong and she wanted to tell someone. But who would she tell? She couldn't tell her mom because her mom just didn't care about her. Everybody who had protected her had left and she wasn't allowed to even speak to anyone. So she felt so alone. She decided to keep it all inside. She cleaned herself up and she went back outside and played with Hope as if nothing had happened. But the reality was, on the inside, Annabelle had been changed forever. Something died inside of her that day. Sadly, from here on out, Colin would SA Annabelle multiple times per week, and he would tell her that these were tests and that she was pleasing the gods. He made her believe that if she kept pleasing the gods, she would make it all the way to the palace, which was Colin's version of heaven. He also warned her to never speak of her tests because they were protected under the secrecy of the church, and if the gods found out, they would tell him because he communicated directly with them. So now Annabelle really felt like she couldn't tell anyone.
Colin would often refer to the rules of the church, and whenever he was challenged on these, he would then refer to something known as church secrecy. That's within church secrecy. I can't expand on those things.
This all continued until Annabelle was about 14 years old. And then things took an even darker turn for her, because now Colin wanted her and her mom to have sex with him at the same time. Annabelle was forced to do it with her mom in front of Colin, and he also ordered them to do it when he was not around. Remember, he told his cult members that there was no such thing as family, and because of that, there was nothing wrong with this.
He's asking them to break one of the last and few taboos, which is sexual activity between mothers and daughters and mothers and their children. And in breaking that taboo is actually a way of breaking the person's will.
Sex sessions were now happening every other night, but it was about to get worse.
You're too uptight. Tonight, before Colin comes round, he wants us to have sex together.
I knew I had no choice. It was horrible. It took me to a place inside myself I didn't even know existed. When Colin came in, he said, "Did I enjoy it?" I was too scared to say no.
Colin told Annabelle that she had to experience pain to make her stronger. So he would be extremely rough with her during these perverted sessions. He would physically mistreat her and he would even bite her with his one tooth. And Annabelle just had to endure this all the time. And she had to just go to school every day and pretend like nothing was wrong. Colin then also started sending Elaine and his kids away on the weekends. And when Elaine went away, he could do anything he wanted without her finding out. So he would tell the girls to wear skimpy little outfits and to do their makeup like Cleopatra. He told them that this was the way of the Scarlet Woman. Jackie and Colin were still having their full-blown affair, and Elaine still knew nothing about it. But then Jackie fell pregnant with Colin's child, and this made him panic. He couldn't allow Elaine to find out that he had impregnated someone else because he knew that she would be furious with him. So he made up a story to tell everybody in the cult, including his wife, Elaine. So Jackie and Colin pretended like Alan had come back into town, and they told everybody that she had hooked up with him again and that he was the father of her baby. But in reality, Jackie had not seen Alan in years. Jackie gave birth to a healthy baby boy and she doted on him. This instantly gave Annabelle hope. She had never ever seen her mom be affectionate with a child, and she thought perhaps this means that her mom would love her now too. But she quickly realized that her mom was only willing to show love and affection to Colin's baby. Jackie still wanted nothing to do with Annabelle.
When we look at Jackie's behaviour around her baby, it was very different to the behaviour that she showed towards Annabelle as a child, largely because the father was Colin, this man who had become a demigod for her.
To make matters even worse, Colin was now forcing Annabelle to have sexual intercourse with a male member of the cult who had learning disabilities. and Annabelle just became extremely depressed. She was so desperate to just end it all. She found a bottle of paracetamol and decided to take all of them and to go to bed. Her hope was that she would go to sleep and never wake up. But she did wake up the next day. She was feeling drowsy, but still very much alive. Jackie noticed that the paracetamol was gone, and she also took note of the fact that Annabelle went to bed extremely early the night before. She quickly went to Colin and told him all about it. Annabelle, of course, had no idea that her mom had noticed that the paracetamol was gone, and she also didn't know that her mom told Colin about it. So later that day, Colin came to her and confronted her. He said he knew what she tried to do because the gods had told him about it. He also told her that there was no use in trying to end it all because she was protected by the gods and they would not allow it. This instantly solidified the belief that Colin truly spoke to the gods for Annabelle, because how could he know that? She had no idea that her mom had told him. She now also felt more hopeless than ever because she now knew that she couldn't even escape through death. After Jackie fell pregnant with Colin's baby, he realized that it was more than likely to also happen with Annabelle, and he wanted to prevent this from falling back onto him. So he instructed Annabelle to go and have sex with another male member of the cult, who was a 19-year-old man named Thomas. This way, if Annabelle got pregnant, he could just point the finger to Thomas. And lo and behold, a year later in 2007, when Annabelle was only 17 years old, she found out she was pregnant. She immediately knew that Colin was the father of the baby because she always used protection with Thomas. She immediately went to Colin and told him that she was pregnant. But then something interesting happened. For a brief moment, Colin had a look of utter shock on his face. But this made Annabelle wonder, how could that be? How could he be shocked? Didn't he communicate directly with the gods? Wouldn't they have told him this? But Colin quickly recovered and gained his composure and just told her, oh yeah, I knew about that. But none of this went unnoticed to Annabelle. She actually knew in her heart that Colin really didn't know about it. But after years and years of brainwashing and indoctrination, she really didn't know what to think anymore. But it definitely planted a small seed of doubt in her mind. I believe this is also when Annabelle had to drop out of school, but I'm not exactly sure when that happened. But Colin just went and told everybody that Thomas was the father of the baby, and even Thomas believed this. So Colin told Thomas that he had to move in with Annabelle and Jackie. Colin's oldest son, Damian, who was 25, was also very much part of the cult. But Damian hated Colin. He hated his dad, and Colin disliked Damian too. He would often put Damian down in front of everybody. He called him a homosexual. He said he was a weak excuse of a man, and Damian just hated the way Colin treated him. Due to Colin disliking Damian so much, he told him to go and move in with Jackie and Annabelle next door too. But on the 1st of January, Annabelle was downstairs when she heard a loud noise coming from Damian's room upstairs. She immediately went there and knocked on his door and asked him if he was okay, but there was just no answer, so she left and she turned around because she knew she was not allowed to enter anybody's room without Colin's permission. So Annabelle just continued with her day as normal and she completely forgot about it. But Damian had a job, and when he didn't come down in time to go to work, Annabelle really started getting worried about him. So she decided that she was going to go and knock on his door again. And this time when he didn't answer, she just had a horrible feeling and she decided to open the door. But she couldn't. There was something blocking the door and she was trying to push it open, and then she just pushed hard against it, and when she opened it, she could not believe what she saw in front of her. Damian was hanging from his cupboard. He had a belt around his neck and he was clearly deceased. Later, they would find out that Damian accidentally ended his own life while trying to perform a sex act on himself. They knew this because he had recorded it on his phone. When Colin and Elaine found out that Damian had died, they were distraught. They screamed, they cried, and they held each other. But the following morning, when Colin emerged, he had a completely different look on his face. And he told everybody that he wasn't sad because he already knew that that was going to happen and that it was Damian's will to die. After Damian's death, Annabelle was distraught. I mean, she was the one who found him, and this had an impact on her life. But the one good thing that came out of it was that it planted a second seed of doubt in her mind, because she knew that Colin didn't know that Damian was going to die, because she saw how shocked and distraught he was the night he found out. She knew he was lying when he told everybody that the gods prepared him for Damian's death, and she also knew he lied when he said it was Damian's will to die, because they had found out through the police's investigation that it was accidental. Reportedly, Damian had filmed the entire thing, and he only wanted to commit a sex act where he cut his oxygen supply off to increase the intensity of his orgasm. So if Colin was lying about what the gods told him, what else was he lying about? About a week after this horrific incident, in February of 2008, Annabelle gave birth to a beautiful, healthy baby girl, and she named her Emily. But now, both Annabelle and her mom Jackie had babies with Colin. But unlike her mom Jackie, Annabelle instantly bonded with her little girl. The moment she held her in her arms, she felt an intense love for Emily. But just as soon as she felt the love, the fear set in. She knew what awaited Emily in her future, and from the moment she gave birth to her, she became extremely protective over her and was trying to think of so many ways that she could keep her away from Colin.
Her fear would have been that in bringing this child into the world, especially if it was a daughter, is that she would become a future victim for Colin Batley.
But the truth was, she felt there was no way out. She had no income, she had no job, she had nothing. Everything she had was linked to the cult. She had nowhere to go. And every time she needed something for Emily, like milk or diapers, she had to perform a sex act for Colin. And this just felt incredibly demeaning. She felt so trapped. But while Annabelle was still pregnant, she started noticing that her mom would disappear for days at a time. And her mom would just say that she was doing work for the church. She also noticed that when her mom returned, she was completely exhausted. And when her mom left, she had to take care of her baby boy. But now, Annabelle also had little Emily to take care of at the same time. Sadly, soon after Annabelle gave birth, she would find out exactly where her mom was disappearing to. You see, Colin had come up with a plan to make even more money out of his cult. He would order some of the women to go and work at a brothel in Bristol called Paradise Lounge. The woman would be gone for a few days each week, having sex with as many men as possible, and then come back and hand over all of the money to Colin. They were not allowed to keep a single dime, and he encouraged them to do this by telling them that they were pleasing the gods, and this was an easier way to reach their goal of becoming the Scarlet Woman. He had tiers for them to reach. The first tier was to sleep with 318 men. The second tier was for them to sleep with 618 men. That is not including the 318 men from the first tier. And the third and final tier was for them to sleep with 918 men, also not including the previous two tiers. And once they had accomplished the third tier, then they would have accomplished the goal of becoming the Scarlet Woman, because then they would have slept with over 1,854 men, which according to Colin was the sacred number that was given to him by the gods. 3 months after Emily's birth, Colin went to Annabelle and told her that she would also have to start working at the Paradise Lounge and would have to bring all the money back home to him. She was extremely worried about leaving Emily behind because she didn't know what Colin would do to her, but she felt like she had no choice. So she also started working at the Paradise Lounge and started selling her body to strangers for $60 an hour. Annabelle became the highest earner at the brothel, but she hated working there. Not only was she selling her body to strangers, but she didn't even get to keep any of the money, and she had to stay up for days at a time. She was absolutely exhausted. The worst thing was that she had to work alongside her mom, and customers would sometimes ask for her and her mom together. Sadly, Annabelle was already used to this because she had to do this for Colin too. But the part that really broke Annabelle was the fact that she had to leave Emily behind, and she was just so concerned about how Colin was taking care of her. Annabelle always counted the men she had encounters with because remember, they had the goal of becoming the Scarlet Woman. But then she started to realize that her mom had actually slept with over 2,000 people already. So that meant that her mom was the Scarlet Woman. But what stood out to Annabelle was the fact that nothing had changed in her mom's life. She didn't go up in rank in the church. Nothing changed. She was still working at the Paradise Lounge. She still looked like she hated her life. So what was the benefit of becoming the Scarlet Woman? This is where reality started setting in for Annabelle, and she realized that there really was no benefit in becoming the Scarlet Woman. And this gave her the courage to give Colin his own test without him even knowing about it. She thought back to the times where she first started doubting Colin. She thought about the time when she told him she was pregnant. He looked shocked. It didn't look like the gods told him about that. She also thought about the day that Damian passed away. He was distraught. He was shocked. It didn't look like the gods told him about that either. So Annabelle decided to take a small amount of money away from the earnings she got from Paradise Lounge and hide it from Colin. If Colin truly communicated with the gods and they told him everything, then surely he would know about it and confront her about it, and then most importantly, she would know the truth once and for all. At first, she decided to just hide £40 from Colin. When she returned to the cul-de-sac, she handed over all of her earnings except the £40 she was hiding. And to her surprise, Colin accepted the money and never knew that anything was missing. This is when Annabelle's eyes really opened for the first time and she saw the truth for what it was. Colin was not connected to the gods. He was not a prince priest. And everything he had put her through was just for his own sick satisfaction. While she was grateful to know the truth, it was devastating at the same time because she now had to come to terms with the fact that she had been living a lie for many, many years and had allowed an old perverted man to ruin her life. But the problem was Annabelle couldn't just leave. She had nowhere to go. Colin and her mom had isolated her. She had not spoken to her biological dad, David, in years because she wasn't allowed to. She also had not spoken to Alan, her stepfather. So she felt she had nowhere to turn to once again. She continued on her trips to Bristol to work at the Paradise Lounge. But now, every time she worked, she would keep a couple of £100 and hide it from Colin. She was saving up to make an escape. And Colin never noticed. She eventually saved up quite a bit of money, but every time she had to leave, she was filled with anxiety because she would worry about Emily. So one night in May of 2009, despite all of her fears, she confided in Thomas, her boyfriend, for the first time. She sat down with him and she told him everything about how she felt, how unhappy she was in the church, and how badly she wanted to escape. And to her surprise, Thomas said he felt the same. He also wanted to leave. So the two of them came up with a plan to make an escape. Annabelle asked Thomas to go to a library the next day before he went to work. She said he had to go onto a computer there and look up her stepdad, Alan, on Facebook. And Thomas did. He went to the library, opened a Facebook account, and got in contact with Alan and asked him for help. Alan was remarried but lived in a town close by, and he responded almost immediately and said he would definitely be willing to help Thomas Annabelle and little Emily. Annabelle and Thomas discussed that it would be best for her and Emily to leave first and then for him to follow afterwards. So a few days later, Annabelle waited for everyone to go to bed. She packed their things and left the house without waking anyone. Alan was waiting for her down the road, and she quickly made her way over to his car with Emily and got in and made her escape. A few days later, Thomas made his escape in the same way too. They all lived with Alan and his new wife for a little while, but then decided to move to Annabelle's aunt who lived in London. Once in London, Annabelle almost immediately got a job. She was trying so hard to build a new and stable life for her little family. But unfortunately, Thomas was struggling to cope outside of the cult. He was not used to Annabelle having so much freedom, and this really bothered him because he had no control over her. He would stalk her and he would even watch her at work, and this was just so difficult because Annabelle was enjoying her freedom for the first time in her life, and now Thomas was just making it so difficult for her. But then Thomas suggested that they go back to the cult, and this is when Annabelle decided that she had enough and she broke up with Thomas. And once she broke up with him, Thomas immediately returned to the cult. Annabelle and Emily were still living with her aunt in London, and one night, almost a year after she had escaped the cult, she found the courage to open up to her aunt about everything that had happened within the cult. Her aunt was absolutely horrified and in disbelief as she listened how Annabelle recounted what her life had been in the church and under Colin's control. She begged her to go to the police, but Annabelle refused. Part of her was still indoctrinated. She actually believed and told her aunt that she had given consent to all of these things. It took a really long time for her aunt to drill it into her head that she was not able to give consent at the age of 7 or 11 or even 15. Everything that had happened to her was illegal. And once this sunk in for Annabelle, she just could not cope with what had been done to her. For so long she blamed herself, but now she realized how this man and even her own mother took advantage of her and just used her as a sex slave. They treated her like an object. She just couldn't cope with it, and eventually she turned to illegal substances and started sleeping around. And then things just got so bad that she even started neglecting Emily.
Annabelle was suddenly confronted with the fact that she had been raped all her life and her child was the product of rape. So she went out, she drank and she took drugs just to seek oblivion.
One of the things that many survivors do when they're in a place of safety is to self-medicate, and one way of doing that is using drugs and alcohol. In addition, they want to prove to themselves that their sexuality hasn't been compromised by the sexual abuse in childhood. So they engage in sexual activity almost to the point of promiscuity.
But this is when Annabelle's aunt stepped in and gave her a reality check. She told her if she didn't clean up her act, social services would step in and remove Emily from her care. This really gave Annabelle the wake-up call that she needed. She worked hard to get clean and get her life back on track, and she did. She was even trying to take care of herself and her health, and in May of 2010, she went to a clinic for a checkup, and she had herself tested for STDs and also HIV. The fear she felt while waiting for her results angered Annabelle. The woman who did the test informed her that based on how she answered some of the questions, her chances of testing positive were very high. Luckily, her test came back as negative, but this was the moment where Annabelle decided that she had to report Colin, her mom, and the church to the police. She couldn't allow them to get away with what they did to her and what they were still doing to others. Annabelle left the clinic and went straight to a London police station. She gave them a statement and shared everything that had happened to her from the time she was 7. The officers were horrified. Tears streamed down their faces as they listened to Annabelle tell her story. The London police station immediately contacted the police in Wales, and soon the cult members' houses were searched and Colin and Jackie were arrested. Colin's wife Elaine, along with other members of the cult, were also arrested, but a few weren't. Elaine, Jackie, and the other cult members who were arrested refused to give the police any information. The only thing that Jackie said was that her daughter was lying. Colin, of course, denied absolutely everything, and he told the police that he was actually a Mormon and that he really didn't even know much about the Book of the Law and that he only studied the Bible because that's what a good Mormon does. Luckily, Annabelle's bravery sparked up courage in the other victims who also came forward and told what happened to them when they were a part of the church. Katrina was one of them, Colin's niece.
The police investigation was difficult. They were trying to penetrate a very tightly knit group who didn't want to get themselves into trouble, but also were willing to stand by each other and not get other members of the group in trouble. The material relating to Egyptology was found, Aleister Crowley's book was found, but they aren't illegal. But once other victims came forward, and that was the beginning of the end.
The trial lasted 5 weeks and Colin had 35 charges against him. Katrina and Annabelle testified against him and the church. The court demanded paternity tests to be done to prove who Annabelle's baby's father was and then also who Jackie's baby's father was. It was proven that Colin was the biological father of both children.
The police were very short of forensic evidence, but they achieved a breakthrough when it's possible to prove by DNA that Annabelle's child had been fathered by Colin Batley himself, despite what he might want to say.
This was a massive blow and shock to Elaine, Colin's wife, which was evident to all who were present at the trial. She was definitely not aware of it. Colin's demeanor throughout the trial came across as arrogant, and Jackie also never showed any remorse, not even a little for her daughter. In 2011, Colin was found guilty on all 35 charges. He was given an indeterminate sentence for public protection with a recommendation that he spend at least 11 years in jail. Judge Paul Thomas QC told him, "You may never be released." The judge also looked straight at Colin, who was 48 at the time, and said, quote, "You formed a community within a community. You were described as evil. That, in my view, is an entirely accurate statement of your character. It is likely that you have dedicated your life since you were 12 years old to satisfying your sexual urges by whatever means at your disposal." End quote. Jackie Marling, 42 at the time, was jailed for 12 years for the part that she played in the group's crimes. Elaine Batley, 47 at the time, was jailed for 8 years. The other cult member, Shelley, received a sentence of 5 years, and the charges were dropped against the others. Annabelle showed up to the sentencing only hoping to see some sort of remorse in her mom's eyes or to receive some sort of an apology. All she wanted was to see something that would tell her that regardless of everything, that her mom did have some love for her. But when her mom saw her, she just said, "Look who's here," with a look of dissatisfaction. This is when Annabelle realized once and for all that her mom didn't love her and that she never had. From what I could find, I do believe Colin Batley is still behind bars today, but there were some rumors going around in 2021 that he had been released. Those turned out to not be true. I know that he did apply for parole at the end of 2023, but it looks like that has been denied. Thank goodness. However, the other cult members served their years behind bars and have since been released and are out along with the rest of society, which is a terrifying thought. Annabelle could finally close this dark chapter of her life. She moved on. She met a really nice man. She had a baby with him, so she now has 2 kids, and reportedly she is extremely happy and just living her best life. And if you ask me, Colin Batley should never be allowed to see the light of day again. I feel that what he did was so disgusting, so vile, that they should never even consider allowing him to be free. I mean, I can't deal with the thought of that. And like I said last week, doing cases on where children are involved, it's really difficult. This one was the worst for me. I mean, I had to take a few breaks and cry it out, and it really just disturbed me. What this man did was so disturbing. I don't have the words to even express how I feel about it. But my heart goes out to the victims, and I truly hope that Annabelle and Katrina and all of the rest of the victims that were not even mentioned in this video, that they will just live wonderful, happy lives from now on. But let me know what your thoughts are about this case and what you think about the sentencing. I really look forward to hearing what you have to say about it. And as always, I'd like to thank you for tuning in. I really appreciate all of the support. It means the world to me. Please make sure to stay safe, and I will see you in the next one.